Hello, everyone. A warm welcome to all of you joining us today. I'm Kinshu, and I lead our work on the India Green Steel Network at Climate Catalyst. This is the second Green Steel 60 session for 2026, hosted by the India Green Steel Network. And thank you for taking out the time to join us today. Next slide, please. Okay, before we begin, I would request you to please introduce yourself in the Zoom chat with your name, organization, and which city you're joining us from, just so that we know who all are in the room today. Next slide. Okay, I'll just quickly run us through today's agenda. So we know that most steel makers in India now have a net zero target, but the harder question is whether they have credible plans to deliver on it. And today's session will look at that question from two angles. First, we have SteelWatch, who will present their corporate scorecard, which measures how ready 18 of the world's major steel producers actually are to transition to near zero emission steel. We will then hear from the team at IEEFA, who will introduce their newly launched climate transition planning tool that helps users essentially stress test a company's decarbonization options and build credible transition pathways. After both presentations, we will open the floor for discussion and questions before concluding with a short feedback poll. Next slide, please. To those of you who are not familiar, Green Steel 60 sessions are quarterly 60-minute knowledge sharing sessions hosted by the India Green Steel Network, where we bring together evidence, insights, and ongoing work from across Indian and global steel community. Next slide. Okay. I think we can move on to our first presentation for today. So we know that steelmakers have now announced their net zero targets, but how prepared are they to deliver on them? To help answer that question, I'm delighted to welcome Caroline Ashley, who's the Executive Director at SteelWatch, and Christopher Wright, who's a consultant at SteelWatch. SteelWatch's corporate scorecard is the first comprehensive assessment of its kind. It rates 18 of the world's major steel producers, including Tata Steel and JSW, on their transition readiness. What I find useful about it is that companies are scored on their own published data. So that's interesting to see how they're doing on their own, according to their own data. And Caroline and Christopher, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll hand it over to you. You can share your screen and start the presentation.
Great. Thank you very much indeed, Kinshu. Really lovely to be here. Thanks for having us today. We're going to explain a bit about why we did this scorecard and what the methodology is and what the results are, and look forward to any comments. We'll move straight on to first, just to say SteelWatch, we're an international climate non-profit organization. We work internationally, and we are trying to drive a steel industry that underpins a thriving net zero economy by 2050. We really focus on deep transformation needed to true net zero steelmaking. We know that's not going to happen in a day, but it has to happen faster than it is currently happening. So why have we done this scorecard? Climate action plans or 2050 targets have become standard, but how are steelmakers going to get there, and are they actually making progress? You can't tell that by looking at their emissions intensity today. You can't look at it, you can't tell by looking at their headlines, their announcements. It's a structural change in their business model and their infrastructure. So the scorecard is trying to answer the question, how do we know if companies are on track? And what are we looking for to judge whether they are on track? Those are the questions we try to address. So we needed to compare steelmakers across countries. That was a key principle of this. So we have the largest steelmakers, but only 2 per country in order to get a full range. And we needed a methodology that would be robust for the years to come for the transition, that would focus on those structural changes. But we also wanted to balance some recent performance, some trend, some current performance, and some commitment going forward. So different topics and different timelines. And of course, reporting is very different across different geographies. The financial year is different, but also what is actually published is different. So our method focuses on investments and action, and we don't score early innovation or announcements. We focus on the actual sort of business and infrastructure. This map is the global coverage. You can see we have companies that are headquartered in 11 countries, but actually they're making iron or steel in 29 countries, which is, of course is a trend in the sector. They're not limited to one country anymore. And between them, they have 175 operating blast furnaces. So what did we find first before we go into the details? No company scored above 50 points out of the possible 100. So our top message here is there is a huge transition readiness gap. Companies are not yet transition ready. They're not making the transition. There is all to play for. The majority are in a fairly tight pack, or we might say peloton. If you're into cycling or athletics, you know this peloton where they bunch together. Around 20 to 30 points is where many of them sit. To some extent, there is difference by region or nationality, geography, because there are different regulatory environments and different situations, but they do not explain all the results. Company decisions are key, which of course is why we focus on companies and the decisions and the investments they make. And why are the scores low? Coal dependence is, of course, a deep structural problem, whereas use of green iron, which is what we're looking for, really is barely off the starting blocks. So these are the overall scores. You can see the 18 companies ranked. SSAB, based in Sweden, is pulling away from the pack at the top, with ThyssenKrupp in Germany in second. Then you have the tight peloton with the two companies headquartered in India sitting in that pack. And then we have the laggards at the bottom. And HBIS in China is particularly at the bottom because some of the data just isn't available, and we score badly for lack of transparency because we think that's part of the transition. Those are the overall results, but I'm going to hand now to Chris to take you through how we got to this, what we look for, and some of the examples. So Chris, over to you.
Thanks, Caroline. So, moving past the overall scores, what you can see now is some of our approach. Now, anytime you create a kind of a global scorecard that tries to assess companies with various different capacities, various different production outputs, there's always kind of nuances in how you might approach it. There's also nuances in what data you're going to collect and how you're going to weight that data in terms of how you might come up with an overall score. This is the approach that we went with, which tries to look at 5 different categories that we think are critical for an overall transition journey to be undertaken. And obviously, all of these categories are in the context of companies that are largely reliant on blast furnace-based iron and steel production. So if you look at that spread, there's a combination of looking at the kind of the inputs or the feedstock of that steel production, looking at their forward targets, looking at their current intensity and their absolute and trends, looking at their ability to scale green inputs now and into the future, and then looking at some of their broader targets and social and environmental trends over the last couple of years. And we're going to dive into 3 of those different categories and show you exactly what happened when we looked at those international comparisons. So our first category is phasing out coal. This is one of the elements that we think is critical for steel companies to make on their kind of broader energy transition. And these are kind of how we allocated points and the different data points that we were looking to collect. So obviously, blast furnaces was a key focus of this collection. And the kind of indicators we were looking for in terms of coal consumption trends and retirement dates could have also gained points. And here what we're looking to do is where the bigger the points, the better, obviously. So if we look at our kind of broader trends over this individual category, we can see very similar to the overall score, and that's partly due to the weighting and the firming. We see the 2 kind of European companies at the top, SSAB and ThyssenKrupp, and for our Indian companies in particular, scored quite badly on this category, both in absolute terms and relative. And we're going to dive into a comparison of some of those companies just after this. But effectively, one of the biggest differentiators across that, I guess, kind of hierarchy is that some of the companies at the top, you have blast furnace retirements clearly in place. And some of the companies at the bottom, you not only have high coal dependencies, you also have limited transparency and limited retirement plans going forward. So this is what it looks like when you break it down into the individual kind of categories. And here on the left, we have SSAB compared to JSW on the right. So these are samples of the individual company profiles that are available on our website, as well as available in the report, where you can effectively collect a snapshot of an individual company and potentially compare it to some of the others in very different contexts with very different operational capacities and plans. So here, obviously, JSW has quite a significant blast furnace fleet. We kind of it gained points for limited blast furnaces under construction in the last couple of years, and it kind of obviously lost a little bit of points for an increasing coal consumption trend, and relative to a company like SSAB, where you had effectively positive indicators in most of these categories, leading the company to score quite well across the board in this segment. In terms of climate performance, we have a range of other indicators that we're looking for, but here effectively we're looking at the emissions intensity and the emissions intensity trends. Now, that emissions intensity trend is our effort to try and capture if an individual company has, in fact, changed their emissions intensity over the last couple of years, which gives an opportunity for some of the higher emissions intensity companies to effectively score points if they've incurred some changes in their operational efficiencies over the last couple of years. And here we can see on these two metrics comparing Tata Steel and JSW that there is actually quite a different emissions intensity trend that we've seen over the last couple of years. And that has meant that effectively JSW scored much better, well, a little bit better than Tata Steel in this category. But both companies with a relatively similar emissions intensity compared to other global competitors obviously scored quite similar points in the initial emissions intensity ranking. And then our final kind of subcategory for today, we had 5, but we're showing 3 today, was our social and environmental responsibility category. Here we decided we were looking for trends in terms of air pollution for NOx, SOx, and particulate matter, as well as health and safety, OH&S workplace injury trends over the last couple of years. And we felt approaching the metric in terms of trends effectively gave a bit of an equivalence opportunity between emerging companies as well as companies in established markets with very, very different air pollution regulatory requirements and health and safety regulatory requirements. We also had 10 points in this category allocated to responsible steel certification elements, whether it was core site or certified steel certification. So these were kind of the opportunities in this category. And both Indian participants in this category actually scored very, very well. And we're going to break down why, but effectively, a big part of their scores were linked to those positive improvement trends in both air pollution and OH&S elements. So here you can see health and safety trends, as well as all 3 air pollution indicators were positive for both companies. And we also saw some engagement, but there's also been clear engagement with responsible steel core site certification for both companies as well. So this is one of the elements where both Indian-oriented companies outperformed their competitors, and this is something that obviously was quite a surprise in some of the outputs of the report.
So just finally, I know we need to wrap up. We have been pleased with the reaction to this. It was the inaugural scorecard. It's had coverage in over 100 publications in 14 countries and countries around the world, particularly where the steel industry is, strong, or there are contested debates at the minute about investments. That's where it's really been picked up. We've been presenting it at several industry events, and we have been engaging with the companies who are assessed on their scores, on their methodology. Just a few examples here. Going forward, the first thing this scorecard did is set the bar. This is what we are looking for: green iron uptake, retirement of blast furnaces, and so on and so on. The results this year set the baseline. As we say, no one's a winner. Everyone's below 50, most are around 20, 30. But future scorecards will show something really important. There are many announcements today. Future scorecards will show which announcements tip into actual investments and then start affecting the other scores in the scorecard, and which companies change the structure of their production. So we will continue with the scrutiny and we'll continue with the scoring and the ranking. And so hopefully we will be back. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Caroline and Christopher. That was crystal clear, and that gives us a clear sense of where producers stand today. And I'm sure there'll be questions from the audience, and I do see a few already, but do keep them coming in the chat, and we will come back to them after our second presentation. We have a section just for Q&A and discussion. On to our next presentation. Scorecard is a great reference for where companies stand today, but the next question is how a company builds a credible plan to move forward, right? And that is something the next tool that we'll be presenting is designed for. To help us explore that, I'm pleased to welcome Meenakshi Vishwanathan, who's an energy finance analyst, and Alistair Doherty, who's a sustainable finance and data analyst, both from IEEFA. They will introduce IEEFA's climate transition planning tool, which is built for Indian companies. The tool helps companies understand what investors and financial markets are increasingly expecting to see behind a net zero commitment. So Meenakshi and Alistair, thank you for joining us, and over to you.
Thanks, Kinju. I just sent the request to share screen, so hopefully I'll be able to do that in a second. So I guess just while we are waiting on that, I'll talk a little bit about quickly IEEFA, who we are, what this tool is, and hopefully who it's going to be most useful for. So in the first instance, I'll introduce IEEFA for those who aren't aware. We are a globally based NGO with a stated mission of trying to accelerate the transition to a diverse, sustainable and profitable energy economy. And we do that really by providing data-driven analysis and insights. So we're looking forward to showing you something we've been working on. This is IEEFA's corporate climate transition planning and analysis tool. What is it? Well, it's a tool that allows users to build and stress test decarbonisation pathways in steel and hopefully in other sectors going forwards, in hopefully a more transparent and much more structured way than corporates have been used to being able to do, particularly without the help of external help, at least from consultants and others. So the aim is really to try to move past ambition and top-level promises, which can often be quite vague and ill-defined, and try to move into sort of like more quantifiable plans that can be interrogated. So that's really the goal. So perhaps most obviously then, it is really a tool for corporates and private entities who are looking to get hands-on, preparing themselves for a low carbon future. But equally, because it's open access, so anyone can use this tool, it's going to be useful for investors and lenders who might be looking to assess the credibility of companies' plans, what they're being told, and ultimately the associated transition risk. So is it a good investment, a good long-term investment? Is this a good candidate for lending, given their plans around a future low-carbon economy? And equally, this could be quite an interesting tool for sort of bigger fish up the supply chain who may be looking to assess their own supply chains, because they're the ones perhaps who are coming under more of the pressure from financial market participants. Finally, I think I'd just like to say that is also quite a handy tool for policymakers. Interrogating the outputs from some of this could be quite a good conversation starter, because if, say, for example, steel, we're looking quite heavily dependent on scrap and the circular economy, or if we're looking at a lot of hydrogen, we're obviously going to need infrastructure in place for that. So this is a way to prove that out and to bring some of those infrastructure concerns to policymakers. Everyone here as well, civil society, probably going to be quite interested to use this to stress test some of the assumptions that they're being given and compare plans across the sector. So how does it do it? Well, that's enough sort of talking from me. But just before we kind of really do step into this, just to say this is an open beta. So that means that it's a tool that's still in development. So we have steel and power right now, and it is tailored to an Indian context. But over time, we are planning to expand the set of industries covered, hopefully enhance the functionality and make some quality of life improvements, and potentially bring this to other regions if there is demand. So we've structured this in the first instance, for the data entry side, in three fairly, hopefully, distinct steps. So the first one really is just some basic information about where the corporate is starting its decarbonisation journey from. So in this instance, we've selected out steel, so that derives the rest of the talk. And the year that we're selecting out is 2025. So effectively, this is a company that is just starting out on its journey. And so then you'll see the step 2, which is where we enter the current production methods, or what the mix looks like today. So here we surface 3 of the most sort of common production methods. So blast oxygen furnaces, coal-based DRI, added gas here as well, but I mean, that is a lesser consideration in parts of India. But also, if you have begun your transition journey or your planning, we do have a lot of other methods, and this is kind of the menu-based approach that we're providing. So these may be less relevant to a lot of less sophisticated users, or perhaps aren't quite so far ahead in their transition planning. But this is where you'll start to see some of your hydrogen-based options, biochar, potentially scrap as well. And we do include some sort of potentially right now low technology readiness options, sort of low TRLs, but potentially at pilot phase now, but in 10 or 20 years might be more important in the productive mix. And you'll see some of these figures here. So these are in a general Indian context. We wanted people not to have this information for themselves. You don't need to know everything about your emissions intensity in order to start building this. So we put some data in, which is on a broader Indian context basis. Now, obviously, if you're a little bit more sophisticated, or if you know what the emissions intensity are from your methods, you might not agree with some of these figures. So you can come in and add a custom method. We wanted to give people that granularity. You can do that. I won't show it now, just in sort of the interest of time. But you can go a bit further with this tool than just what we're offering you here. Okay, so I'm going to show a bit less there on that and come back. So I've just stuck in a couple as a sort of fairly basic illustration of what a current mix might look like today. So predominantly made up of blast oxygen furnaces in this example. And you'll see these little sort of flashing Christmas tree options. These allows you to specify whether you have additional levers that are being applied to these methods. So, for example, are they the best available technology? Do you need to use less coal or energy input in order to produce the same amount of steel? Is it energy efficient? Are you applying blending? Are you using renewable energy for some of your auxiliary processes? Or potentially even do you have sort of CCS pilots in place? Less likely in 2025, but perhaps going forward, it's something you might consider. Now, so that calculates for us a sort of cradle to gate, sort of on a scope 1 and 2-ish basis, what the emissions intensity of the operations are. So I'll just complete that configuration. Success. Okay, and so this is where we get into really the meat of the whole operation, which is where we're asking users to select at milestone years, short, medium, and long term, their technology and lever mixes, which are going to help get them to net zero at the target date that they want to achieve it by. So in this situation, I won't dwell on it for too long, but we've effectively got the same productive mix, but I've added in that we've upgraded them or retrofitted these to make them more energy efficient, because this is 2030, so it's not particularly far into the future. 2040, we've started to mix in green H2 and sort of scrap-based EAF into the productive mix, but we still have some legacy assets here. And then in 2050, I've effectively removed any fossil-based production methods, so retired the blast oxygen furnaces and switched over to hydrogen and scrap, and a little bit in a sort of currently low technology readiness option, but still there. But how do we know that these selections are getting the user on track? Are they credible? Are they going to be viewed as credible by other stakeholders, financial market participants, for example? Well, we have this progress towards your targets, but in order to work out whether or not you are on track, you need a benchmark. So you need to know whether or not you are adhering to something which could be viewed as credible. So in this instance, I've just selected out linear NDCs, but we do also have a more accelerated version. Going forwards, we'll be keen to add sort of sector-based pathways that may be credible. But for now, we have these sort of options like financial benchmarks or sort of national level ones. In this instance, we've got just simply linear NDCs out to 2070, which is what India is targeting. Now, we could have accelerated in here. it is in beta, so let me just complete that configuration quickly. So you can come in and sort of test whether or not this is sort of particularly different if you are to use sort of different benchmarks. So if we're going for a more accelerated approach, it might be that you don't necessarily quite achieve those targets, but then by 2050 you do. But that's for the user to decide what they want to benchmark themselves against. Now, I haven't actually gone through this, but we're giving you the options here. This is not an optimization tool. It requires users to look at the menu, start playing around with it, check whether or not they're on track, understand for themselves, so whether or not these technologies are suitable for them. So it isn't a one-stop shop solution, and it isn't like a set of solutions. It gives users the option to start getting to grips with this. But we do, for example, if you were to apply CCS, for example, here, pop up a warning effectively to say, well, CCS is currently at relatively low commercial availability. Is not necessarily proven, and so this should maybe be viewed as illustrative for now, but we do want to give users the option to select some of these. I'm just going to remove that one for now in the example. Now, super quickly, because I know I'm sort of low on time, I'm going to move on to complete that configuration and move on to the analytics. So we'll just have a quick look at the some of the data that comes out of the inputs that the user has selected. So this is a simple emissions pathway showing what their selections will achieve compared to their benchmark. This is another view which lets them see compared to, what is actually driving still those emissions. So blast oxygen furnaces and rotary kiln coal still make up a fairly significant part of the mix. So as we taper that comes off and we replace that with low carbon alternatives. But this green area here, this is really what's been driven. These are emissions reductions, and what's driving that is potentially as or more important. And so to look at that and assess that, we look at a waterfall-based approach. So we start at the base year emissions. We look at, in the first instance, the methods that are being applied in order to achieve that, and then how much is the final intensity. So in this case, it's predominantly green H2 shaft furnaces. Some scrap-based EAF, and then a sort of pilot production method. We also apply levers to this. So we've used renewable electricity as either a captive source or assuming by 2050 that the grid is much cleaner. So this is by using renewable electricity into scrap-based EAF or LTE methods, for example. Now, we also have another view on this, which is by levers, because it may be that you have two or three, you might have set it up as plants, 3 different green steel plants, or you might have 2 different green hydrogen methods, which would mean both of them are reliant on hydrogen. Or it may be that you're blending scrap into your blast oxygen furnaces while also using scrap-based EAF. So you're heavily dependent then on more the circular economy and sort of secondary metallics or etc. So it may be that you need to have that conversation with policymakers and say, well, we need the infrastructure because we are effectively 90% dependent on green hydrogen being available by 2050. But that isn't the case in this particular example. It's a mix of material, green hydrogen and renewable energy. Finally, I just want to quickly point out, we have an indicative sort of CapEx calculator, which tells you how much you're going to need to spend on an amortized basis, on an indicative basis, in order to achieve some of these goals, in order to build out the plants and the technologies that are going to replace what you have. Now, what we don't have on here is the business as usual CapEx, because this is assuming that will be additional the additional production, so you would need to spend on new blast oxygen furnaces anyway. But so we will be looking to add that, and then potentially what that means if you were to potentially apply a carbon price, etc. So I'm going to stop there because I know I'm super low on time. I'm going to pass to Mina just to sort of take us through. I'm going to click on the download link. Oh, actually, because it takes half a minute, I'll click on the report that I downloaded earlier, and then Mina can sort of take us home.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ali. I just want to talk quickly about the report, which is essentially the output that we can that the tool generates. That is a downloadable document that captures all of the different analysis and the graphs that the user develops through the tool into this document. Something that can be easily shared internally with colleagues, externally with any consultants, investors, or anyone that the company deems fit. So we have a little bit of context on the Indian steel sector, the currently available production methods, decarbonization levers and all of the different charts and analysis that the user generates through the tool. And if you scroll towards the end, you'll see that we've also put together some resources on how companies can now move forward and use this analysis as a starting point towards building a more robust climate transition plan. So we have resources from the Ministry of Steel. We have the SEBI BRSR reporting format, along with a couple of IEEFA's own research, such as IEEFA's Corporate Transition Planning Framework. So before I end this presentation, I do want to very quickly talk about how the tool ties into some of the other research that IEEFA is doing. We've released a Corporate Transition Planning report in January, and we had another report released in April, looking specifically at the decarbonization readiness of Indian steel companies. And some of what the research tells us is that most Indian companies do have climate targets set in place, and they have climate ambitions, but most of them lack in sort of stress testing those targets against future scenarios, and lack the granularity that really raises the question on whether these targets can actually be met, and what is the way forward, and gives investors and financial markets the level of detail that they're looking for. And we truly believe that this is where the transition planning tool can help plug in that gap. It's a way for companies to be able to play around with different decarbonization pathways, different production methods, different levers, and really get to the level of detail that they need to be at, so that that we move away from simply targets to actual concrete steps forward. So I will put in a link to some of the research that IEEFA is doing in the chat. But like Ali mentioned, the tool is still in beta stage. We're really looking forward to engaging with companies, with different stakeholders, getting your feedback on what sort of features would be most useful, and get it into people's hands as soon as possible. So thank you very much, and looking forward to answering your questions.
Great. Thank you, Alistair and Meenakshi, for walking us through the tool and talking us through some of the findings as well. And I'm sure many of our attendees who work on the transition planning bit of steel decarbonization will find it very useful. We will now open the floor for questions, and please feel free to keep posting your questions in the chat, and I will ask you to unmute yourselves and ask your questions. So I think we can. Oh, the first question is from Alistair himself for the SteelWatch team. Alistair, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, sure. So, sorry, not to dominate, but yeah, I was just wondering if the scorecard differentiates by geography at all. So whether or not EMs are allowed some sort of dispensation for sort of like national considerations. So, and how that feeds into the scorecard. So if they were to retire their blast oxygen furnaces a bit later, is that going to still be equally negative, or is it region agnostic effectively? Yeah.
Yeah. Great question, which everyone asks in a different way. For us, it was a really important principle to have one standard that we applied across countries. And to answer another question, it does include China as well. So that's almost where it was trying to break new ground, by taking one standard, because the climate doesn't care where emissions come from. But that said, we do purposely have a mixture of trends the last 4 years and absolute. And the companies in more established markets think that's really unfair, because we cleaned up our air pollution 30 years ago. Why are you giving points to Indian companies that have made progress in the last 4 years when we did it 30 years ago? Of course, companies in emerging markets say this is unfair on us because our NDC is later. We say we need a universal one. Most of the companies are across more than one border. I think it's only 6 are actually only inside a nation. So if we're going to have a standard, steel companies are increasingly going international. We need to judge them internationally, but we have got these trends as well as the absolute levels. And one company said to me last week, based in Latin America, headquartered in Latin America, it's like, well, given the competition, we're really happy that we're not at the bottom. So people interpret it how they want to interpret it, as according to where they are. But yeah, it is region agnostic, country agnostic.
Great.
Thanks.
Okay, I think we can move on to the next question. This is from Dakshish. Dakshish, if you're still on the call, please go ahead and ask your question. Dakshish, can you hear me? Oh, okay. I think he's in the middle of something. I will ask the question on his behalf. I think Dakshish's question is there a metric for measuring workforce impact and rehabilitation and reskilling within the scorecard?
Yeah, another great question. You saw from what Chris presented that we give points for responsible steel certification. And the reason we do that is they spent years developing metrics around workers and community. They cover occupational health and safety, labour rights, human rights, community worker well-being at a very fine level of detail, including skills, rehabilitation, grievance mechanisms, whether communities are involved in resolution of grievances. I mean, a level of detail that we could never do and should not do. So that's why we decided to use Responsible Steel on this as a proxy. It's not because we are a member of Responsible Steel, but it's not because of that. So whatever they have on these issues in their methodology is reflected in our points through their methodology.
Right, thank you. Thank you for that answer. I think we have another question from Dakshish, this time for IEEFA. His question is, has anyone here conducted a techno-economic analysis of various decarbonization levers, implying how much will it cost to reduce X amount of emissions? The idea is to see how much it will cost a steel company, whether it impacts their OPEX, CAPEX significantly. From his experience of engaging with steel companies, they won't implement changes that significantly add to their costs. Someone from the IEEFA team.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we look at parts of this change. So certainly on the CCS side, we've kind of looked at the actual costs and how that might function as a lever or tool, because we have significant doubts as to the sort of cost implications of that. And it's effectively just layering simply another cost on top of existing production. It's not like there are even sort of cost, the cost curves associated with green hydrogen are debatable. But certainly in the terms of scrap, that would be relatively low-hanging fruit. But CCS we see as sort of in a European context, we see it maybe costing something like 200 euros roughly per ton of CO2 captured. So we really don't think that there's a particularly strong economic case there, particularly, and I see Dakshish put another question in, particularly when you look at the carbon price. What's the incentive there for corporates to really adopt some of this when it's, the carbon price is maybe 1/3 of what it might cost them to do. So it's going to need a considerable amount of policy support if that's going to be the approach. And that's probably why we would look significantly at other options like scrap and the circular economy, potentially steel as well, because if there is in Europe, for example, a fairly relatively high carbon cost associated, because it is so heavily carbon intensive, it can, depending on the trajectory of the carbon price, it could become economically competitive. But yes, no, we don't have anything that lays this out specifically across all of the decarbonisation levers, particularly when it comes to OPEX and CAPEX. In the tool, I think we would like to add particularly an OPEX section and what a carbon price might mean for sort of the OPEX assumptions associated. But yes, that's an important bit of the puzzle that needs to go. And I think that some of the sort of MAC curves are quite important in this, because it gives you some of that low-hanging fruit. So I think there is stuff out there on that.
Great, thank you. I think I have another question for the IEEFA team. This is similar to the question, Alistair, you asked the SteelWatch team. As you said, India is an emerging market, and IEEFA has argued as well that global transition scenarios often don't reflect Indian conditions. What did you build in this tool differently that would suit Indian conditions and Indian companies specifically?
So in the transition planning tool, so this is all kind of built bottom up from an Indian context. So we kind of we put all the cost assumptions in that are based on an Indian context. We put like the current market. So when you're looking at any of the savings, like in terms of emissions that you're making, it's using, well, what is the kind of the sort of grid in India looking like for all your electrical inputs? What is the current state of the blast oxygen furnaces, because they tend to be sort of more polluting, I guess, than other geographies. So it's all kind of tooled for an Indian context, and then we provide information in the reporting, which is sort of Indian relevant. And Meena might want to be able to talk to that a bit more in terms of what we're actually sort of providing to help in the local context. But certainly from the tools point of view, all of the data is keyed in to an Indian baseline. Now, that's not to say that it couldn't be used by other regions, but you would need to go in and specify your own data using the custom options that we kind of didn't really go into in the tool. But yeah, I don't know if Meena or anyone else wants to add.
Yeah, sure. I'll just want to quickly come in and say that there's also room here to add certain like sector specific decarbonization pathways that we've like seen come about recently, like Niti Aayog released its Viksit Bharat scenarios specific to the steel sector. So we're hoping that in the future versions we might be able to add that in along with the other benchmark pathways, wherein a user would be able to see if they're able to align with Niti Aayog's projections for what the emissions intensity should be for the steel sector in its net zero scenario and then current policy scenario. So those are some of the features that we want to be able to add it to make it more grounded to an Indian context for an Indian steel company.
Thank you for that. If there are any other questions, please go ahead and ask them. If not, I have one more question. This is for the SteelWatch team. I was just wondering how should stakeholders interpret the gap between corporate commitment and the actual preparedness, right? Like that's what the scorecard is all about. Is this primarily a financing challenge, technology challenge, or is this a policy governance challenge? I was curious to know if that's part of the analysis as well and what your findings were.
That's something we think about a lot. It's not what we analyze in the scorecard. The scorecard is factual, based on data and company disclosure against our framing of what is needed. But we think about that question. Of course, we think policy matters, but we focus on corporates, and we focus on corporates because we think corporate decision making and investment matters. Of course, energy prices and hydrogen availability and capex and opex matter, but change in the past has not come from businesses that just made decisions based on balance sheet. We didn't get rid of the horse and cart and go to the motor car based on an Excel spreadsheet or whatever the equivalent was in those days. So we still think that actually leadership, decision-making, recognition of the fact of climate change and the upheaval that is going to bring, and balancing the costs and benefits of action versus inaction. These are all matters that will affect the transition, as well as policy and energy prices and so on.
Makes sense. Okay, we have another question, I think, from Abhinav. Go ahead.
Hi, this is a question on the tool by IEEFA. I'm just wondering, what do you plan to do? Is there some sort of capacity building that you'll be doing for companies to use this? And do you also see scope for financiers to use it in any way in their decision making on lending?
Thanks, Abhinav. Yeah, I'll take that one quickly. So my background really is finance. So I'm not technically a sort of energy market analyst. And I looked at this very much, I approached this as sort of with that mindset. So sustainability teams, they're supposed to be experts in everything. And it's very difficult for them to actually understand whether or not what they're being told is, even feasible in the context that they're being told it is. We would like to do some more outreach with financials. We've been talking to corporates. Probably shouldn't name any names, but we have been talking to a few about how this might be leveraged and how they might then push this down the chain to some of their suppliers effectively. So we have begun that outreach, that platforming. We want to do a lot more of this, but it is still in beta. And I think by the time we get to a stage where we think, right, we've got all the functionality that we want, that people need. So we don't have OPEX in there for now, but that is something that we significantly would like to include. So yeah, to answer your question, certainly are thinking about this in a sort of financial context, and that we are looking to do more of that going forwards. I mean, we do got anyone who wants to test the tool would be perfectly happy to get as much feedback as possible, and then when it's in a sort of more final position, that's when I think we'll push it. Just one final point is when we have spoken to, or I've spoken to some of my old colleagues about this sort of tool, they see the value in it. What they are, maybe it's a slightly lazy view of theirs, but they say, well, that this tool would be fantastic for us if you could click a button and say, right, tell us what it means for JWS, or what does it mean for, you know, whichever company they want to assess. They don't want to have to go through and enter all the data themselves, which is a bit disheartening when you've built a tool which allows people to sort of play around with it and make all these things. But I guess from a financial market participant point of view, they just want to know have the information given to them easy peasy. So that's something we need to consider, I think, going forwards, whether it's something that we do. But we'd need to scrape data, and there'd be a bigger challenge. Yeah.
Okay, there's another question for you, Alistair. Mansi, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Hi, Alistair. It looks like a very nice tool. I think I probably might have missed it. So 2 questions. Is it publicly available now? Or if not, then when will it be? Secondly, is it a subscription-based model, or is it a free tool for everyone once it gets launched? So companies can feed in their information and they can track how they can reduce their emissions. And if that is the model, then how does IEEFA is planning to, keep a track of what impact this tool is making? Because I'm sure like the company level information might not be disclosed directly on the dashboard.
Yeah, exactly. So really good questions and things that we didn't have time to talk about, I guess, in the main thing. But yes, it is out there now that the open beta is there for people to play around with, and we are hoping to get additional feedback. It is going to be completely free to use for anyone going forwards. And you kind of raise a really important point there, which is that all of this information that gets entered is not part of IEEFA's website. We don't actually see the information and the data that is being entered, so it's effectively completely anonymous. So that might help some corporates, because you don't necessarily want to be disclosing all your potentially even CapEx plans going forwards. Yes, it is available. It is going to be free. We do want people to use it and give us feedback. The data is going to be housed elsewhere. We will see usage stats. So we'll understand sort of how much it's being accessed. We probably need to look at other ways in which we can anonymize and leverage some of the information, but we've been very careful to make sure that it's sort of kept segregated from non-identifiable effectively. Yeah, we'll share the link, I think, if it hasn't been done already.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Alex.
Great. There's another question from Caroline this time for the IEEFA team. Go ahead.
Obviously, we didn't have much time to see the tool, but I just noticed that electric arc furnace, the wording is scrap-based EAF. So how do you deal with the assumption that EAFs in the future are partly scrap and partly transportable iron or hot briquetted iron or direct reduced iron on site? Is there a different EAF or?
Well, yeah, I mean, so I think we just went for some like the sort of broad options that were maybe available. I think that's exactly the sort of input that I think we need in order to because what we want ideally is to have where when you select an option, there will be additional drop downs to say, okay, what is the specific technology type or the input that's being used, and that will then impact both the capex and the opex and the decarbonisation options, and give you slightly different levers and that you're being used. So, yeah, we do have. I mean, we're building this not specifically for steel, so we've kind of been doing this. We've got others in the work in the background, but I think when we come back to this and when we are looking to enhance, it's going to be those sort of more granular issues that we need. We did have to balance this against sort of, complexity of the tool versus, because there will be some sophisticated users who want to go into that kind of granularity, but there may also be others who are just like, I want to know the broad technology types, what is a broad pathway? And I guess we should also just say that this isn't like a full this isn't a full substitute for like your own research and your own sort of full transition planning, but it is a starting point and something that you can use as a base. So yes, a good point, Caroline, thank you, and something that we're looking at in future.
Great. I think Nandan also has a question. Nandan, go ahead.
Just two quick questions. The first one for the SteelWatch team, like have you had any sort of immediate reactions from the companies, like either JSW or Tata or any of the other ones that you've been talking to? Have they thought this is valuable, useful? Just love to know what the reactions were. And one question for the IEEFA team is, I was just thinking about this tool from the perspective of, say, a domestic bank in India or say another financier. When a proposal is submitted by a steel company saying, I want so and so amount of finance, and they obviously will submit some of their technical information along with that. Would a banker, do you think it's a good use case for a banker to be able to, like, then at the back end input some of this information on their own with certain assumptions, and then be able to say, this is likely how much, I mean, if they ask for it was X amount of dollars, this is what the tool is basically saying is a fair ask? Or is that something that you think financiers would be able to use specifically? Because that's the one sort of quick use case that's coming to my mind. But are there other use cases that you're thinking from the financing perspective?
Should I go?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we've had a lot of engagement in different ways with companies. Before we sent the data, then we sent the scorecard score and the methodology, and we had conversations in that process. One company put extra information in the public domain, so we could take it into account, because if they just put it in an email, we can't count it. It has to be in the public domain. So we think that's a good increase in transparency. Others, of course, gave us extra information or challenged the methodology, but we didn't change the methodology. And since it was launched, it's been variable. We've had one company where I've been to 2 or 3 different events, and I've heard from different managers in the company like, oh, our CEO really wants to know how we can increase the score. So we know certainly in some it's been taken seriously. We've had other companies being approached by journalists, and one in the US said, oh, they're anti-business, whereas another commented on their score and how hard it is. So we've had a whole range of results, but I prefer not to say what individual companies have said.
Alistair, do you want to go ahead? Or the IEEFA team, yeah.
Meena, I don't know if you want to jump in on this one. Sorry, I got a bit distracted there, Nandan. If you had the question from the IEEFA side, but Meena, if you want to take this one, that'd be fine.
Yeah, sure. Ali, if you want to jump in at any point, I think Nandan's question was whether there's a use case for a domestic bank or a lender to be able to use the tool to test out any proposals they get from steel companies and see whether the amount that they're asking for matches with what the tool sort of gives out in our analysis. I think, yes, yeah, we definitely think there is a use case for investors, for domestic banks, for lenders to use the tool. I mean, I would want to caveat by saying that the CapEx information that we have on the tool is indicative, simply because there is wide range of variation in CapEx that will be very company specific. So the data that we used in the tool is indicative. So I do want to caveat that, but there's definitely a use case for lenders to be able to put in some of the information, see what sort of emissions intensity that lands up at, or also potentially look at the climate transition risks of making that sort of an investment and in assessing those proposals. So I think that's one of the use cases we definitely had in mind when we developed the tool. Ali, if you want to come in, add anything, feel free to.
Yeah, no, nothing much to add. I mean, we sort of touched on it a bit before in terms of whether or not this is a sort of sound long-term investment if they are not keeping up with their planned decarbonisation trajectory. And I think kind of a killer app really is going to be sort of carbon price assumptions sort of going forwards, be that through CBAM or whatever. How is that going to feed into sort of the OPEX assumptions going forwards? Because that could really be quite a powerful illustrator of whether or not the company is going to struggle going forwards. Now, obviously that depends on what you believe carbon price is going to do in India or sort of in Europe potentially with CBAM. So definitely had financiers in mind, and from that background myself, I know how difficult it is for sort of generalists and analysts to really try to dig into some of this information, because they're not sector experts. I mean, I am not a sector expert. I've built this, or we've built this together using sort of standards, but obviously we don't know all of the sort of specifics and in every regional context. So yes, it's a good baseline, a good point to start, and a good way to initiate conversations. But it is just that it's not like a full root and branch solution where potentially a consultant might go through and interview all different parts of the business. It is a good starting point, particularly for corporates who are just beginning their journey. Yeah, and using that to talk to higher up the chain in financials.
Great, thank you. I think we're almost at time, so I will take a couple of minutes to wrap up. Thank you again to all of our speakers for their excellent presentations. I'm sure I'm speaking for everyone when I say that this was extremely useful for those of us who work in the steel decarbonization space. And to everyone for joining, thank you for joining and contributing to today's discussions. The question and answer round was really, really interesting. We will share a recording and the presentation materials following the session through the India Green Steel Network newsletter that will come out at the end of the month. We will now have a short feedback poll on your screen. Please do tell us what your feedback for the session is. This will help us plan future sessions as well. And thank you once again for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.